Hey there, welcome to the Ten Commandments Bible study. This is day 5, the name of the Lord, the third commandment, part 1. And we've come now to the end of our week, our first week, the 5th day, and we're going to start the third commandment and just do the required part. But this is so beautiful. This is so fun, too, because we get to think about the third commandment maybe in a little bit different way than we've ever thought about it before. Because usually, when we think about the third commandment, it's, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. So that's all we think about. We think about the negative side. And so when we hear somebody speaking the name of the Lord in vain, we're like, man, you oughtn't do that. And maybe when we speak the name of the Lord in vain, we're like, I shouldn't do that. But today, we're going to think about what's required in the third commandment. How can we turn this on its head a little bit and make it positive? So let me read this first question from the Catechism. What is the third commandment? The answer to the third commandment is, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain. That's Exodus chapter 20, verse 7. So what is required in the third commandment? Here's where we kind of turn it on its head a little bit. We know what's forbidden, but what does he want us to do? The third commandment requires the holy and reverent use of God's names, titles, attributions, ordinances, word, and works. Okay, so God's name. Read Psalm 29:2. And just look at that psalm for a second, that verse. Give to the Lord the glory due to his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. So think about this. How can we speak the name of God in such a way that glorifies him? You see, instead of saying, how can we not take the name of the Lord in vain? Well, let's turn it around. How can we speak the name of the Lord in a way that actually glorifies him every time? You notice what the psalmist said here. Give to the Lord the glory due to his name. So let's do that. Let's improve our language so that instead of restricting our voice, we add to our voice and we intentionally, thoughtfully, prayerfully glorify God's name by actually speaking in a way that does so. How can we do that? Maybe write down your thoughts there about that. God's titles are also mentioned in the Catechism. Holy and reverent use of God's names and titles. And then you'll see some of those there in Revelation chapter 15, verses 3 and 4. I've also referenced Revelation 4:11, Revelation 5:13. I hope you'll go and look at those passages. And then after you've looked at all three passages, what I want you to do is list some of the favorite titles and attributions you find there of the Lord. And then just write down the ones that you like the best. Maybe pick 2 or 3. And let's just go back up to that first question there. How can we speak the name of God in such a way that glorifies him? What if we were to say, instead of saying, God bless you, we said, may the King of Saints bless you? Wouldn't that be cool? And what would that do? Well, it would speak one of the attributions of God, one of his titles, and it would glorify him, and people would go, wait a minute, usually there's a God bless you there, but you said something else. What was it that you said? God's ordinances is next. Read Ecclesiastes 5:1. I love this verse. I just love this verse. Keep your foot when you go to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not what they do, that they do evil. So what is he saying here? He's saying, be careful what you say when you're in God's presence, because you can speak too much. The fool speaks too much, and they don't get it that in their much speaking, they're actually doing something evil. See, that's the whole thing about this, isn't it? Our mouth can either be a blessing, and we can intentionally speak God's name to glorify him, or our mouth can be a curse, and we can use it for evil, just like the fool here in Ecclesiastes 5:1. And I ask the question here, can we speak too much when we're at church? Well, I think you know the answer to that question. The second half of that is, what would happen if we intentionally listened more than we spoke? Consider that, and then I want you to write your answer out to that question. Then we have God's Word and works. Read Psalm 138, verse 2. Okay, once you've read that, I want you to consider, is it possible to treat God's Word and His creation as ordinary? Oh, and also, I want you to look at Job 36:24. Read that one as well. I think it is possible, isn't it, for us to treat God's Word and His creation as ordinary. But they're not. As a matter of fact, they're extraordinary. The psalmist says here in Psalm 138, "For you have magnified your word above all your name." So if God considers his word that important, how should we speak of his word? Are we to speak of it in just ordinary terms? Or is it something more extraordinary that we need to consider how we speak of it? And how do we recapture a proper reverence for God's word and for his works? At least in our language. So record your answer there to that. As you're thinking about how to recapture a proper reverence for God's word and his works, I want you to look at the consideration section there. It says the mouth is in view with the third commandment. And that's obvious, isn't it? How do you use yours? Okay, so think about that for a second. How do you use your mouth? Do you use it for good, or is it undisciplined? What can you change today to begin a healthier pattern of speaking? This is something that you can implement right now. You can identify those things that you say that you know do not glorify God's names, titles, attributions, ordinances, word, and works. And what can you do about it? You can change that pattern of speaking, but it has to start someplace. So let's start it today. Maybe write down that one thing. Just identify one thing that you say that maybe you should try to intentionally eliminate or intentionally add when it comes to glorifying God's name. Something that you can say about him that will sort of turn everything up on its head. Instead of cursing, no, it's blessing. Instead of just any old name, maybe you pick one of those attributions that you really like and you start telling people about that, when you speak about the Lord. So, to begin a healthier pattern of speaking, what can you change today? Now I want you to write down the third commandment. It's easy. This one's short too, right? The first commandment was short. The second commandment, kind of long. This one's manageable, isn't it? You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, part 1. Part 2, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain. So you have two parts to this command. Part 2, for the Lord will not, is our reason annexed. Take that with you, write it down on a piece of paper, a little card, slip it in your pocket. Take a few minutes today to look at it and rehearse the words to yourself and meditate on that third commandment. I'll see you next time as we study day 6, the third commandment, part 2, on the 10 Commandments Bible Study.